Miyama, and I'm a member of MenEngage Alliance and also a co-author of the MenEngage Alliance Climate Justice Working Group article to NORMA, the special issue. So I am so honored to be able to be here and then facilitate. And I want to introduce every speaker briefly, and then I will introduce them later with more detail. But here we have Vidar and Kuram. Can you wave your hand? As an organizer from MenEngage Alliance, and also three speakers from NORMA editor, Jeff Hearn, Martin Hultman, and Tamara Shefer. Can you wave your hand? Thank you. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Tamara. Could you revise after that if it's not correct? And
Perfect.
great, thank you. And we also have two other speakers from MenEngage Alliance, Laxman and also Sohana. Can you wave your hand? Hi, thank you. And then Sohan, thank you so much for matching my background. Appreciate it. So, yeah, as you see here, this is a save the date poster, and I am so excited to introduce Norma and MenEngage Alliance is collaborating tonight. And yes, as you see, I am very nervous, but I hope this event is gonna be the amazing opportunity to learn and grow. So thank you so much all for joining. We have 60 people here. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for the heart. Wow, this is a bursting. Oh, cool. Anyways, so before we start, maybe Sohan, could you introduce the translation system because we have a very unique one with the Bangla and English. So to those, oh my God, there's baby. Hi, Paula. Wow, sorry, I got distracted. Yeah, so there is a translation system with English and Bangla. So to those who speak Bangla, could Sohan can introduce a little bit about the system?
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যারি। তো যারা বাংলাদেশ থেকে যুক্ত হয়েছেন সবাইকে স্বাগত জানাই। আপনাদের আপনাদের জন্য ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ ট্রান্সলেশন রয়েছে। আপনারা নিচের দিকটা একটা গ্লোব চিহ্ন রয়েছে, সেখানে ক্লিক করে আপনারা সেখানে জাপানিজ ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ সিলেকশন করলে আপনারা সেখানটায় বাংলায় অনুবাদ শুনতে পারবেন। আপনাদের সবাইকে অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ আজকের এই আলোচনায় যুক্ত থাকার জন্য, এবং আমরা পুরো সেশন জুড়ে আপনাদেরকে শুনতে চাই। ধন্যবাদ। ওভার টু স্যারি।
Thank you, Sohan. So yeah, we have two interpreters, and they're going to be a great work in translating into Bangla as well. So yeah, I am very, very excited for the all the discussions. And Kuram and Vidar, is there anything you want to put before we start?
It's just wonderful that we're all here, that it's happening.
Yeah, so true. Kuram, is everything okay
Yeah,
with you?
everything's okay. Thank you. And if you could introduce the agenda for today.
Okie dokie. Thank you so much. And so, yeah, we can move on to the first session as a welcome. It's about the session where Kuram and I are going to talk about why we're here, and then, yeah, what's the MenEngage Alliance, and then what's this event about. So maybe Kuram, do you want to go with the MenEngage introduction session first?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Thank
Thank you
you.
everyone for joining us for the session today. Very nice to meet all of you here online, at least for now. And the MenEngage Alliance session, as some of you might be aware of, some of you might be coming new over here. So I just want to do a brief overview of it, is that the Alliance, the members in the Alliance have been working on issues related to patriarchal masculinities and gender justice, and seeking how we can involve men for really fostering and engaging with the rights of women and LGBTQ and other gender justice more broadly. And this has been happening since a long time. And then over time, we started to formalize as a network. In 2013, it became more formalized. We have been working over for a decade now as an established network, and we are very proud and happy to say that we are present in almost across, well, really the whole world in across 92 countries with various individual members, organizational members that are all working on various areas of work related to engaging men and boys for gender justice, social justice, and specifically as the webinar today is centered on climate justice as well, because we recognize that we all bring different expertise and skills to the work that we are doing. And that is what we are over here to do as well. And I can share more in the chat, but I just want to keep it short. Thank you, Sari. And over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for keeping it short, but you can talk a bit more if you want.
I think we'll come back to more in the Q&A and Lakshman and so on.
Got
can
it.
bring you also.
Great. Yeah, that reminds me. Maybe we can talk about the timetable more briefly. So, can you go back to the previous set?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, as you see, as an agenda, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. So the first part will be a NORMA session where Jeff and Martin and Tamara are going to talk about the special issue of NORMA, an international magazine journal for Masculinity Studies. And after that, we're going to have a 15 minutes Q&A session where you, the audience, you guys can openly talk about what they want to ask, what you want to ask, and then the question that you have while listening to the speakers talk. And yeah, there are 2 ways that you can engage. One is a chat box where you see right now, where you can put your questions anytime you'd like while the speaks. And we're going to collect the questions and we'll answer as many as possible. But due to the time restriction, there might be some questions that might not be able to be answered. But we're going to figure out how we can kind of engage, maybe after the webinar, like publishing some kind of article about it to answer some questions left, maybe. So that's one way that you can participate. And then the second way is raise your hand with the reaction button, and then you can ask questions with the mic on. That's another way that you can ask questions. But also due to the time restriction, maybe everyone cannot be able to speak up at the time, but in that case, you can also leave the question in the chat box where we can collect after that. So that's the Q&A session. And then after that, we're going to do the same thing with the MenEngage Alliance part. And as a closing time, we would like to kindly ask you to leave some reflections or feedback to us. And this is actually the first webinar session, but there will be another 2 sessions coming soon. One is hopefully in April, and one is 1 month later. And the second webinar will be about backlash. So that's one topic that we can put in our mind while we listening to speakers talk. And yeah, it'll be great if you can provide us some insights or information that you already have or you want to ask to other speakers in the future. So that's the thing that we'd like to ask you to kind of collaborate and then engage and then create an interactive session together. So that's all from me. And then we are going to the first NORMA session. Could you make a slide going to the Jeff's part? So Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Yours. you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sarah, and thanks to also the other Kuram and the other organisers. It's really nice to be here. I've got 5 minutes to introduce what is a double special
Yes.
issue.
Oh,
And
sorry. I should have introduced you. Can I
no,
read
well,
you?
as you,
Sorry, I totally forgot about it.
what do
So
you want
yeah,
to
um, would you like to would you like to introduce yourself, or would you like me to read out your bio, which is comfortable for you?
Oh, I don't know.
Sorry.
That's too difficult. I don't know, waste time on my bio. Um,
So
I,
yeah,
I can
you can introduce yourself.
I
That'll be
can do
great.
it in very
Thank you.
briefly.
Sorry.
Okay, I've been involved in this area a long time. I'm linked to universities in Sweden and in Finland and the UK and South Africa. And yeah, I've been working on a lot of different issues around men and masculinities and gender, violence, sexuality, and so on. And I've tried to cut across from academia to activism to policy. But I'm not as much as an expert as my other co-editors in this area. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Okay, so in terms of my 5 minutes, we're talking about what is a double special issue of the journal NORMA, the International Journal of Masculinity Studies. Both parts are actually now online, and there's a link there. Hopefully you can find it. And as you can see, the theme is men, masculinities, and the planet, the end of the Anthropocene, ecological, social, economic, political relations, process, and consequence. Quite a mouthful. And it's co-edited by Kadri Arvik, who may be joining online at that point, and then Martin Hultman and Tamara Shefer and myself. And I mean, putting this very simply, this special issue brings together like sort of two lots of thinking. One is around critical work on men and masculinities and activism, and then work on climate change, the environment, the Anthropocene, and so on, putting them together. And of course, there are many, many connections really between these areas. Again, putting it rather simply, at a very sort of general, global, aggregate level, unfortunately, men tend to have a bigger impact in terms of carbon footprint and environmental impact generally in terms of consumption, travel, transport, particularly tourism actually is a particular issue as well, particular problem. Also in terms of attitudes, you could say that, again, at a very general level, globally, that men tend to actually have less pro-environment attitudes and don't support policies or politics, political parties so much as women around these issues. And then also a very important question is that, certain industries particularly are extremely impactful on the environment. One could mention, the meat industry, one could mention military industries, petrochemicals, transport, and those industries tend to be dominated very much by men, both in the leadership and the ownership and the running of them and so on. So this is what the special issue is about. If you go on to the next slide, please, Kuram. We started thinking about this, actually, I realized just over 2 years ago, December 23, in a meeting in Sweden, which involved Martin and Kadri and myself, and then Tammy got involved very quickly. And we did a public call. We got over 30 abstracts, I think, sent. We then sort of whittled it down to about a bit less than half of that. And then, eventually, in fact, we have an introduction by the four of us, and then we had 10 articles. And it's in two parts. And after a lot of discussion, we decided to do the first part, which you guess you can see here. Basically, all these first 5 articles are outside the global Northwest, if that's the correct term. Dongyang Li, writing about the Pacific, and particularly the Chinese relations to the Pacific, a very important issue, which Tammy will talk about a bit later. Cornelius Nkube and colleagues talking about sustainability practices in Zimbabwe amongst men, again, a very important sort of on the ground movement. Pierre Smith-Kana looking at Colombia and looking at gardening and again, sort of environmental positive practices. Joseph E. Brown in Australia a bit differently, looking at dystopian fiction and how that gives a different angle on thinking about how these things are represented. And then Janice Swan in Canada, I guess that's also in the West, so I apologize for that, in the global West, looking at climate denial in relation to pipeline politics, which obviously is also very important in terms of Indigenous people and so on. So that was the first group of 5, and that's now fully online. There are many ways of cutting across and organizing the papers, which we may come back to and talk about later. Some of them are more about reporting on the state of the world, and some are more about activism. Okay, the next slide, and very briefly, these next 5 are from Northwest Europe. Henry Huvenen on meat-related online activism amongst, pro-meat in Finland. Andrea Hildig looking at flood responses in Denmark. Stina Tidman Fabian, Jonathan Lay, also in Denmark, looking at green fatherhood. Cameron Dunnett, in the UK, of vegan activism. And then I won't say more, the collective work from Stephen Burrell and yourself, Sari, and Laxman, and Kuram, and Mohammed on the Climate Justice Working Group of MenEngage. That's me. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you. Next slide. I'm gonna put my timer on. So, so I'm gonna kind of introduce the contributions in this special issue from 2 themes, or under
Sorry,
2
Martin.
umbrellas.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Could you introduce yourself briefly a little bit first?
That's true.
Yeah.
So my name is Martin Hultman. I'm a professor in sociology at Gothenburg University with a specialization in science and technology studies. In comparison to the very long-standing scholarship of Jeff and Tamara in Masculinity Studies, I entered a bit late. A bit later, so around 2012-13. So it's a mixture in the editorial team of 2 very experienced editors and masculinity scholars, Tamara and Jeff, and 2 scholars, Kadri and myself, coming in with a very in-depth knowledge around issues on environment and climate and issues of multi-species, which Tamara and Jeff has also worked on. But yeah, so that's the kind of combination for the editorial team. Yes, so I continue now. So you can say
Martin, and you can set your timer now. So you have
okay.
5 minutes after your introduction, actually.
Okay, I'll do that then.
You don't need to stress.
Okay. So you can say that there are 2 different approaches from the empirical analysis in this special issue. One of them, you can understand that as critical, which has been a very much and large part of the critical studies of men and masculinities, of course. So, and those who have written about climate denial in Canada, for example, Janice Swan in this special issue, she follows that tradition very strongly, so to speak. This is also a tradition that has critically engaged in techno fixes and techno solutions. And Andrea Hilding is one of them in the special issue who are thinking through ideas of engineering logics and how flooding and adapting to flooding in a Western perspective and connected to masculinities often take this eco-modern approach to kind of solve everything with techno fixes. So next slide, please. no, back. Yeah, this one. Yep. The engaged one. So then there's another kind of group of papers in the special issue which are more engaged. And the image you see here is some example of my own research on this kind of engaged scholarship. I've been doing some education work and all that. But one example is Pierre Smith Canna's work in Colombia, trying to figure out how men and masculinities are connected to community gardening, for example, as well as the work of Nkube with the Zimbabwe environmental movement, also there, trying to really see the transformation and the aspects and how can we follow this work when we look into really transformative work within these movements. So we can shift to next slide. And our introduction also follow a description of the field that can said to combine this idea of the industrial breadwinner masculinities, which is this climate denial and very extractivist masculinities. So we talk about a bit about the research that has been done from that perspective in the introduction. And then this eco-modern masculinities in which we have techno fixes and not changing the logics of the society. So we have a couple of those articles and research on that as well. And then this more careful and caring and ecofeminist and ecological masculinity strand. So in our introduction, we talk about these forms of studies and empirical examples, and those are also part of the special issue. So last slide, next one. I also want to say that we are entering a period in which we are living through the effects of a hotter world and the biodiversity loss. And here I think that masculinity studies have a crucial contribution to do, because both critically analyzing the norms and practices in connection to patriarchal structure and extractive industries, but at the same time also looking into those who can actually change their practices and ideas and values to understand how we can reconnect to our ecosystems and the more than human world in a way so we can have as inclusive and fair and just transition together as possible. So thank you. And so Tamara is next. Welcome.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everybody. So my name is Tamara Shefer, or Tammy, as most people know me, which is why my co-editors struggle with the name. I am a professor in Women's and Gender Studies at the University of the Western Cape, which is in Cape Town, South Africa. And a lot of my work has actually been on young people and gender sexualities, but a lot of work on men and masculinities as well, as Martin pointed out. But I've also more recently moved to thinking and working on environmental issues and looking at how environmental issues are entangled with social justice issues as well. We can't look at these things separately. And I've recently been very fortunate to get a research chair in the Blue Humanities and Gender Justice. So I will be moving much more into that area. And so this is really a wonderful sort of project to be working on, because it brings together all of my interests over so many years. I just want to make two quick points about the special issue. Firstly, coming from the global southern context of South Africa, it was very heartwarming for me that we got quite a few articles that are located in the Global South. We've got Zimbabwe, Colombia, China, Australia, although I question that being in the Global South, but certainly it's a colonized space, post-colonial space. And then, of course, the Men and Gender article, which I'm so looking forward to hearing, being spoken about more, is so important in terms of representing so many different parts of the world and many global southern parts of the world. So I think that's really important because I've worked on a lot of transnational projects and people always struggle to our engines, our literature research engines are biased. Raymond Connell spoke a long time ago about Southern knowledge, but we still struggle to actually, foreground the work of global Southern scholars. So I think it is really important that we actively sought and actively try to include as many of the articles that were sent in, and also in the literature cited. And then, the second quick comment I wanted to make that I think is so important about the special is, and I think this came very much out of the thematics that Martin outlined, is that while the special focuses on how men and masculinities are implicated in current crises, there also are many examples of men doing things differently and different ways of both doing masculinity and living in relation to other humans, more than human species, and the planet in general. So very quickly, the Blue Humanities is a growing body of interdisciplinary work, which really draws on hydrological and water-centric thinking to get people to think about the current injustices, social, environmental, and to also tune to ways of responding, of feeling and engaging with responsibility regarding what Annette Singer's called our damaged planet. And I think that the Blue Humanities shares with hydrofeminists as well a critique of the dualisms that underpin. So this idea of humans being human exceptionist thinking, that humans are something other to other species and the planet, we also see as very much linked to colonial forms of dominance. And so patriarchy, coloniality, and global capitalism really intersect with a set of logics that are based on a set of binaries. And so the feminist project, ecofeminism, has long been thinking about that. And I think Blue Humanities is raising this kind of work, and ecofeminism is also. And this critique of this logic is threaded through the special edition. It comes out in many of the articles and also in our introduction. So watery feminisms are drawing very much on decolonial, indigenous, post-humanist, new materialist feminist thinking. And hydrofeminism is really just one of those bodies of work within this larger groundswell, you could say, or swelling up of thinking that is engaging with bodies of water, oceans, also with lack of water, droughts, that are also important in understanding the challenges we face, but also finding ways of challenging these and living differently. So I don't really have time to go into hydrofeminism, but there's a lot of literature out there, and I think what's very important about it is the notion that the figuration of we are bodies of water. We are 70% of us as humans made up of water. We are, my watch has already gone off my 5 minutes. I will try and sum up in a second. We all connected through a hydrocommons that is dangerously polluted and contaminated through a lot of the doings of humans, particularly some humans, and as we acknowledge in the Anthropocene, some masculine male humans. So, but I think we can go to the next slide very quickly, and I'll try and end off. While there isn't a lot of work in critical studies of men and masculinities that is drawing on hydrofeminism and the Blue Humanities, there is a lot of work. Martin himself is doing some of this work with Rivers, but 2 articles in the special edition speak to these issues. amongst and they show the productive possibilities. So Dongyang Li's article, which Jeff mentioned and flagged on the Chinese Oceanic Anthropocene, unpacks two examples of a film and also a fictional narrative which flag ecological authority and patriarchal control, which Lee calls blueprenurial masculinities, which masks the human and more than human tale of this blue modernism that China's been engaging with, in particular with land reclamation in the interests of addressing, apparently. So in a sense, it's the eco-modernism that Martin, or the eco-masculinities that Martin is talked about. And to end off with Andrew Hildig's, which I think we've said quite a bit about already, so shows also some of that eco-modernism, how although these are a group of men responding to floods as a climate crisis happening, a lot of what they are doing aligns with eco-modern masculinities, and in some ways hasn't really improved their sense of responsibility for environmental damages and challenges. So sorry to run over my time, but I think I should end over there and hand over. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, three of you. It's wonderful to hear from, three researchers who has been working on this topic for a long time. And yeah, I think we should need 8 hours to actually listen to all of the great talk. But now here comes the Q&A session, one of the most exciting session of this webinar. So yeah, please feel free to raise your hand or leave any comments, any questions. So in the logistics speaking, there is one thing I'd like to mention while we're waiting for the questions. So yeah, one of you asked us if there's any recording or slide available later. We will try to share any slides or recording afterwards. So if you'd like to receive any of those information, please let us know. And I'd like to ask one question while we're waiting for another question, which is, so I personally study men and masculinity studies in graduate school now. I'm a master's student at Waseda University in Tokyo. So I'm really interested in ecofeminism, masculinity, or men's movement, which has been studied for a long time, actually. In 1995, there was Connell, Reverend Connell, who has wrote a great masterpiece, Masculinities, where she wrote about the eco-friendly men's movement and interviewed 8 of the men who has been working on this intersection of masculinity and also climate justice. So it has been 30 years after that today, right? 2026. So what was one obstacle or one growth that has been done in the 30 years? Was there any change or was there any obstacle to be solved that has not been done yet? Do you have any opinion on that? Maybe Martin or Jeff?
Yeah, I can speak to that. In our introduction, we have 2 answers to that question that I remember. You can fill in, Jeff and Tamara, but the first one is that in the 1990s, it was a conservative movement of men who gathered in the forest, but to kind of reinstate their masculinity, which is called Men and Mythopoetic movement. And this movement was very critically analyzed by men and masculinity scholars rightfully so, because from my perspective and my analysis, Paul Poulet and I have done an empirical analysis of this, and where we also included some of the literature. We do think it was important that the critical men and masculinity scholars analyzed this movement and called it out, so to speak, because it was continuously masculinist, so to speak, and tried to not change their masculinities away from patriarchal structure and also towards more very in-depth connection to nature. They were more or less only using nature as a backdrop to kind of reinstate their masculinity, their hegemonic masculinity. And then I think the other answer is that ecofeminism also experienced critique and a kind of a backlash during the 1990s and early 20th century. They were accused of essentialism, and I think that some of that accusation of essentialism might have been true, that it was a binary tendency within the ecofeminism, and maybe in languaging that in a not so kind of well-defined way. But on the other hand, it might also have been a kind of critique against a more transformative environmental movement overall in the 1990s and early 2020s, that the ecofeminism had to kind of that they became target of that kind of more broader critique. So these are two answers to your question why the Connell research was not really followed up empirically during the 1990s and early 20th century. It is also something that me and Paul Poulet wrote about in our book Ecological Masculinities, but those, we argue for that in the introduction. Maybe Tamara and Jeff want to add something. If you...
Shall I go, Tammy? Briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, just briefly then. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of complicated question, actually, I think. I'm just reflecting. I mean, I got involved in these issues, both activism and academic, around the late 1970s and early 80s. And actually, there were a lot of different strands that were feeding into the activism. Some was from left socialist politics. Some was from green politics, anarchist politics, personal development politics, and so on. And those strands were all there and kind of contested to an extent. And I do think then somehow something changed. I'm talking about the UK now, actually, specifically, around the sort of late 80s, 90s, where I think a lot of men, I don't know, some got disillusioned, but some also took those issues like into their workplaces, like youth work, education work, health work, and so on. And I think these kind of issues, the so-called big issues of the planet or the global issues, got lost, I think, and, I mean, for obvious reasons, they've been forced on the agenda very much so in the last, 15 years or 20 years. So there's been a big change. And I'm talking now both about activism and also about academic. I mean, there's somewhat different arenas, obviously, but there is a connection and there is some degree of parallel. And I think the other thing I'll just say, I see there's a question online which is about youth focus, but maybe Tammy could answer or respond to. And I also see some hands from David. So maybe I should hand back to Sari at this point, or maybe Tammy wants to come in.
I just
maybe
wanted to
Tammy,
add one small point, actually, from the kind of more, I suppose, if I think about the South African context and what issues captured the attention in terms of boys, men, and masculinities, coming into 30 years ago, our new democracy, one of the key things facing South Africa, and I think it's very much a case for many post-conflict societies, is that there's huge high rates of sexual and gender-based violence, And also we were facing HIV, the pandemic, and very quickly realized that issues of gender and gender power relations and male power and male decision making in reproductive health played a very big role. So I think key issues, focus very much on human-centered issues, because these were what we're facing, new democracies and many, I think, global southern contexts facing HIV and, the high rates of gender-based violence, which, I mean, we still face today, but I think increasingly one is beginning to realize how one can't look at these issues separately, not only at a philosophical, conceptual level are they all linked because of the kinds of logics that I mentioned earlier on, but also because those climate crises, environmental disasters and damages always impact, as I think Jeff mentioned right at the beginning, worse on those already disadvantaged. So I just wanted to add that in because I think, for example, there's still quite a lot of resistance in my own context to talking about environmental issues and the kind of argument that well, let's solve human problems. There's so many social inequalities and poverty. How can we even begin to think about, more than other species in the planet? But so the way one begins to bring these together and thread them through each other to show and explore and make, kind of create an understanding and a consciousness of seeing these things as so entangled, and both in terms of what's underlying them, but also in how to respond. So, yeah, sorry, I didn't respond to the youth question, but I think it's absolutely critical. So I'll hand over to you. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I love seeing those kind of, all the interesting questions coming up. So we have 8 minutes left on this session. So that's my strategy. So I would go for David first because you raised hand first. And as for the youth question, and also the relationship between masculinity and climate change section. Maybe we can keep this question to the next session of MenEngage. Maybe Sohan, you have a lot to answer to this question. So could David go first, and we'll see if we can reach to Michael, Andrew, and MD.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I'll try and be quick. So I did my master's degree in psychology looking at nature connectedness, and part of my research involved understanding individuals' connectedness to the natural world in spaces that were more or less natural. One of the things that I found is that my participants reported a lot of nature connectedness more highly and frequently in spaces like parks and, kind of other like somewhat outdoorsy spaces. They felt more natural, more connected to the natural world than they would report, say, on top of a mountain or in a completely, open space. And one of the things this got me thinking about is the idea of affordances and behavioral affordances relating to skills, because I found some research. Well, okay, I could go on for a long time. So I won't do that though. Has any of our speakers research, especially, around kind of the bodies of water idea and people related to skill development in terms of people integrating the natural world into their self-understanding, and how might that interact with support for things like masculinity and, public policies? I hope that made sense.
Yeah. So I think both me and Tammy can say something short on that, because we have both developed education and pedagogies in which you bring experiences of different types of ecosystems and nature and align that with thinking through feminism and issues of power. So I've just published together with 4 colleagues a paper on something called flow feelers. It was a study group for men who studied ecofeminist texts and gathered for 6 times in different types of nature environments within a city. So they were exploring a culverted brook under the city, at the same time as they were meeting, thinking and talking about ecofeminism. And that actually made them understand how they were also cultivated as men in their masculinity and via connecting to this ecosystem. So there's this paper on that education called Flow Feelers.
And just to add to Martin's, we've written in the South African context on wild sea swimming and how engaging in the ocean with diving, free diving and swimming, how that opens up affordances for seeing oneself as a part of and therefore responsible and able to respond to environmental injustice, because and how it creates a kind of effective engagement through actually being in ocean, seeing other species, being a part of the alternative world. So very briefly, but there's quite a bit of writing on that. So I'm sure you can look it up and see. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope we answered the question for David. And we have 4 minutes left. Michael, do you want to go?
Yes, thank you very much. And very nice to see some old friends and colleagues. If we start with the assumption that patriarchy is both a system of men's domination over women, the domination of some men over others, but also the collective domination of men over nature, where do we go with that for this discussion? For example, is it inevitable that, within a patriarchal system, and I kind of think it is, that we're going to see environmental degradation and sort of short shrift given to the environment? Or can we somehow mobilize our understanding of men's contradictory relationships to patriarchy to develop ways to mobilize men and in support of climate action? So that's my question.
Great one. Thank you. Jeff, Tamara and I have spoken a bit. Do you want to say something first on that?
Well, yeah, I guess it's repeating what you said, Mike. Nice to see you, Michael. Yeah. That these issues have not been the way in which men generally have been mobilized in relation to gender politics. It's been issues around, family, work, violence, anti-violence, health, as I was saying, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, this opens up, I'm not now talking about people in this room who are perhaps many who are involved in activism, but actually it opens up a very different kind of politics at a more general level, and I think it's quite hard to actually envisage where that will go, if I'm honest. And I also think there are always dangers in what you might call mass, again, putting things in inverted commas, men-only politics, being organized. But I think, in a sense, what you're raising, it needs a different kind of politics where these things are seen as kind of obvious. Just as, for example, I don't know, you could say politics around, I don't know, men's health is seen as obvious or more obvious than it was 50 years ago, right? So this is part of something that has to happen, I think, but it's very contradictory. And it's also potentially very dangerous as well, as I said, because as soon as you start thinking about so-called men's politics, as it's sometimes called, it can be hijacked in this sort of counter direction. I mean, that's my first not very helpful reaction, I think, but it needs a different kind of, my least favorite word is integration, but I still use it. Least favorite word, a different kind of integration into kind of mainstream, larger politics beyond those of us who are involved more in activism. That's what I think it needs.
Thank you. Martin, do you want to go briefly?
I just want to add that I think that the organization Men for Gender Equality in Sweden, which Vidar is here, did some really interesting work called Men in the Climate Crisis, trying to figure out how to actually combine these issues. In Sweden, there's also quite a big grassroots movement called Rebel dads. And just to say that Suhanur is also going to talk about eco men later on. So there's some interesting experimentation going on, I think, which can be really interesting to look a bit closer into. So just want to add that on a positive note.
Can I just say, it's very obvious to see the counter forces of the links between, if you like, anti-climate consciousness or, you know, anti-environment and right-wing politics and petrochemical politics and militarism. Those links are really clear, aren't they, on that side, so to speak. So it's like creating something that is equivalent or more on this this side, putting it in a very binary way, I think.
Great. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
thank you. And to be completely honest with you, I've read so many articles from Michael, so for my master's thesis. So I'm like, oh my God, Michael's here. Anyways, I'll send an email maybe later. So yeah, thank you so much. And we are reaching the time, but it was a very important topic earlier about the very complex positionality of men, especially male activists, who have the risk of hijacking pre-existing feminist movement. Those are a lot of the issues that we, MenEngage Alliance Climate Justice Group, also talk about for a long time. So that's one thing Laxman can talk about later, about the allyship or those other positionalities. So we'll go with Andrew, and then we're going to the next session. And sorry for those who hasn't been able to ask questions, but if you leave the comment, we'll try our best to answer in some other ways. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I basically run a community environmental group in Devon, UK, called Green Futures. And without going into, because we haven't got much time, I'll just go straight to my question, which is that there's clearly lots of this research into, masculinities. Where's the connectivity with government and government decision making?
Good question. So I think we can all say something very short on this, not least Jeff, who's been doing a lot of work of lately connected to organizations and kind of more broader structures on that. But I think you raises the extremely important perspective and question that we need to think about masculinities in their structures. And if we only zoom in on individual change, we're going to lose out on connecting it to the bigger picture. So we definitely need to also have in mind that changing environmental laws, for example, or changing workplaces and changing infrastructures and all of that, it needs to be done simultaneously, because otherwise we are left with changing only individuals and not the big structures.
Can I just add before handing over to Jeff, maybe to just say that I think we're living in a masculinist world where institutions are patriarchal. Not only are they dominated by individual men, but they're also dominated by a particular set of leadership, particular kinds of ways of interacting, a kind of valorization of particular principles and practices of engagement. So I think that's what we sort of underpinning this whole editorial really is an understanding of working at multiple levels, from the interpersonal, the personal, to the institutional, but also to the larger level of what are the kinds of cosmologies really that inform how we live our lives. And I think that's one of the things I was trying to talk about in bringing in hydrofeminism, because it allows one to see very clearly the kinds of binaries. What Michael mentioned, how not only is masculinity about control over women and children and governments, but it's also control over nature and the planet, the sense that we can extract from it, we can do what we like. And I think it's those kinds of understandings at the philosophical level, as well as the institutional and the interpersonal level, that we're trying to bring the concept of masculinities and patriarchy in. And of course, they're entangled, as I'd said earlier, with a kind of colonial logic and also a capitalist, global capitalist logic. And we can't separate these things out. So yeah, just to add my 2 cents there. Thanks. Over to you.
Okay, very good. Well, hi, Andrew. Hello, nice to see you. Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, yes, to repeat, I think the issue of like organizations, government institutions is so important, and it's such a difficult area, but it has to be done. I think the other thing I'd say, I mean, I lived in UK a long time, and interest in government from government was very, very limited. There was interest when Labour was in opposition as shadow government or shadow party, actually in these issues there was, but maybe not so much when they got in government. But I mean, these things also vary a lot by different country and different context. And I can say, having lived also in Finland, you know, there it is possible to actually even know ministers. You know, it's a very different kind of society. It's much smaller, and the same also to an extent in Sweden as well. It's possible to have much closer connections. So the size of society people are in and the way it works actually vary fantastically. And also, I mean, you know, the EU has got big problems, as all most institutions have, but in some cases, there's been more interest, I would say, in a progressive politics around men and masculinities and gender equality in the EU than there has been in some of the nation member states as well. So these things are very contextual. But I do think, you know, this is really absolutely important. It involves working in political parties, it involves working with ministers and governments, as well as civil societies, NGOs, MenEngage, and all the rest.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the great questions. And yes, as you mentioned about the EU situation, probably some of you might be interested in listening to more about the Asian continent, which is we have the great person to talk. So I'd like to introduce Sohan and Lakshman from MenEngage Alliance, and we're over to the next session of MenEngage Alliance. And Sohan gonna talk about the grassroots work of climate justice and masculinity. And after that, Lakshman gonna talk about MenEngage Climate Justice Working Group's article on NORMA Special Edition, which carries not only the goal, it's the way. So over to you, Sohan. Could you start with the introduction of yourself briefly, and then floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Sari. My name is Swanu Rahman. I'm from Bangladesh, and I am a climate justice advocate. And I joined last 5 consecutive climate COPs. And last COP, I joined as a young negotiator for gender and just transition. And I am also part of the global working group of MenEngage Alliance for Environmental Justice and Climate Justice. And my time started right now. I just click my stopwatch. And if we look the chat box, many participants asking the model or the practical example. And same experience we had while our working group visited the European Parliament, and we met a MEP, and he asked, "You have lot of concept and lot of research, but have you any practical example?" And then my colleagues who are here, like Bidar, they finger out me and Yan, that Sohan from Bangladesh, Ecoman. And now I want to share some practical, very brief, but practical, groundbreaking and ground truth solution from the ground. And you know, Bangladesh is a climate vulnerable country, but Bangladesh also showing leadership on the locally led adaptation, addressing loss and damage issues. And what we did under our Ecoman initiative in Bangladesh, supported by men and MenEngage Alliance, that the climate crisis is not just environmental challenge, it's a social challenge and deeply shaped by power, norms, privilege, and masculinity. And in Bangladesh, we see how patriarchal system influence who make decisions, whose voices are heard, and who resources are used. Without addressing these norms, our climate solution remain incomplete. And last 2 years, we worked with young men and young women in 4 districts, 3 in a coastal Bangladesh named Satkhira, Burishal, and Khulna, nearby the mangrove, world largest mangrove forest, Sundarban, and another one is the northern part, is a moving sandbar. And you know, Bangladesh is a delta country. And through this EcoMan program, so alongside protecting the environment, rights of nature, we challenge traditional gender roles like the drinking water collection or the household work, showing that care, collaboration, and accountability are powerful tools for the climate action. And climate justice requires gender justice, economic justice, and rights of nature. So now I want to share a practical example. If my colleague Khurram can change the slide, that's the story of tiger widow. And I am showing, sharing a story from Guardian. Guardian featured them as a husband eater. So due to climate crisis, salinity is increasing in the mangrove nearby region, and cyclone is increasing. So human, especially men, are entering the tigers area in the middle of Sundarban. So it's created a conflict between human and the wildlife, especially tiger. And while the tiger attacking men, so the numbers of the men are died due to tiger attacks increasing, but whole the stigma is goes to the women's shoulder that you are the bad women, you are the husband eater, and they are excluded from the social services, from the society. So we address that stigma through our listening campaign, dialogue, and we did, and I request my colleague Khurram for share the next slide. So like artistic model, like the mural, like how we can address this, how the men can also part of the solution to tackling water crisis, tackling this stigma in the climate crisis area. And obviously tiger widows as well as the small fisher folk who lives their whole life in boat without the social services or any minimum services, or the sanitation worker in the South Asia or Bangladesh who are socially excluded, and engaging the government, and it's fully youth-led. And the next slide, Khurram. So in my conclusion about the EcoMan using the entry point is a helping women or just planting saplings, but it's not the EcoMan. EcoMan also challenging the male power and entitlement. What privilege I am getting, what entitlement I am getting from the society. It's not only individual behavior change, it's also individual, structural, and systematic change. Third one, positive masculinity without politics. No, also political. Pro-care, justice, and anti-patriarchal. Climate action without justice, without gender justice, without racial justice. EcoMan is saying climate justice and rights for people and nature. And last one, men as victim or perpetrator only. But EcoMan is saying communicating man as shaped by and responsible within the system. So my concluding message is climate crisis is accelerating, and we are hearing new files, new record, the 1% men who are destroying environment, nature, and creating gender-based violence. It's the right time to accountable those powerful men and protecting our environment and nature. Thank you. Over to Sari.
Thank you so much. It's great to have opportunity to actually listening to the practical work that has been done in especially in global majority area. So I really appreciate your talk. So over to you, Laxman, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Sari. And hello, everyone. My name is Laxman.
I am with the Global Secretariat team, and today my responsibility is to quickly present the article, and we will post the link of the article in the chat as well for you to read it in detail. But today we'll just take you through on some of the crucial pieces of the article that we have in this NORMA journal. And I think this article was jointly written by 4 of us in support from the Climate Justice Working Group. That's Sari, Khurram, Stephen, who is not able to join today, unfortunately, and myself. But again, the article is not just we wrote based on just sitting in our tables, but it is through the consultations we did with our members that Khurram talked about. So we did consult around 40 people across the Alliance through the surveys that we gather information. We had structured interviews as well with 15 of our members to sort of consolidate what we are really learning. Some of these questions you are asking, for example, those were the questions we went back with our members. Rather than theoretically thinking about what this should look like or what it is about, we went on to people who have got the relevant expertise on the ground, doing the work, have been faced a lot of challenges as a result of climate crisis. And that analysis is some kind of positioning us to sort of develop this article. And through that, also try and analyze and put together some political framing on how this work with boys and men should look like when it comes to climate justice as an agenda, and also unpacking how climate justice, gender justice, and masculinities are so interrelated. And we need to look and understand that in a nuanced way. So if you go back to the other slide, the first one's Khurram. So I think, climate, one thing that we are really trying and understand as all of us have been saying is that climate justice or climate change or crisis is one of the most urgent global changes that we are facing today, right? It's an issue of survival of the humanity or everything in the planet, and most particularly of the humans, right? I think, we are the generations that are facing the brunt of it. While we knew about the challenges that we are going into as a result of the emissions that we all contributed to, obviously different parts of the people world contributed differently, but the impact of whatever happens in any part of the world has on everyone else as well. So hence, it's a collective justice issue. And we've been kind of looking at all of that as well. And for being as MenEngage Alliance that particularly focuses on working around transforming masculinities, our concern is the longstanding ecofeminist and decolonial analysis that demonstrates climate change is deeply rooted in patriarchal, colonial resource extraction and capitalist models of industrial production and the systems around that, right? And that also, these modes also organize in a way that maintains certain power structure and hierarchy that exclude women and people of gender diverse identities, as well as other men and boys as well, across the gender diversities and identities, and exploit nature and resources with regards to disregard for people and planet. And hence the proposal that we are also looking at the same time to the sort of the conversation that we keep getting into is the green transition, to the sort of looking at ways in which we can confront this patriarchal logic and the masculinized corporate and industrial power structure that it has sustained. And it has become more collectively urgent that we look at the role of men and masculinities, as we call it, as both as a reason for perpetration of climate crisis as a result of male-dominated patriarchal, very colonial, extravist oriented system, to also looking at as the part of the problem. And also while looking at that, look at the potential of mobilizing boys and men as potential solutions as well. And then the slide you are looking at is basically also to look at urgency that we look at men and boys as not as homogeneous group, and also engage work with boys and men requires a critical examination of how gendered expectations influence their conduct toward nature and their role in perpetuating or challenging environmental harms. So it starts, again, important to highlight that it starts from an early age as well. And hence the urgency of working across life cycle and also working with children and young people from an early age so that we can actually shape their behaviors and attitude with more, that is more centered around care, cooperation, and ecological stewardship. And that is often a path that we need to look at. And that's where the theme or the title of the article comes in, is that care is not only the goal, but it's a path. So throughout this process, in the next slide, we argue that I think there is an urgency to also look at, in the next one, Puram, that we look at, you continue clicking, there will be things popping up on the screen. But also, we need to look at this as a radical transformation of this capitalist, colonial, and male-dominated industry system and mechanisms, right? Again, that relates to, working with men in different positions of power, because they are the gatekeepers of power, or the power holders that have power to influence and transform things that, as per the article, ask we have. And also that I think that connects with also this very neoliberal economic argument that we keep on hearing, and very technocratic solutions being put forward to address the climate crisis is not really the way to go. And then, the solution is not either training certain people on certain positions either. It's about how do we really touch their hearts and minds. And this is what we have been hearing, and includes in this article, the work of Sohan, the work that another colleague has been doing in Uganda, the work that Man and Vidar in particular has been leading in Sweden and some of the Eastern European countries as well, is that until and unless we're really able to touch the heart and minds of people, the ownership on the agenda and the commitment and sustainability of the agenda is not possible. And in majority terms, because of who we are as MenEngage, our interest is how do we factor that in the work we are doing with boys and men, so that boys and men can take on appropriate responsibility to dismantle the patriarchal and power system and hierarchy, so that we can actually move towards more human-centric, environment and ecocentric and just approaches around it. Also, in what we realized is that in all of this analysis, there were these 8 themes that we kind of garnered out of what we heard from our colleagues around the world. One of the things on the next slide is that there is a bit of a mixed analysis or mixed understanding of what this work is about. So, in some ways, there are some very promising examples and evidences coming out from the work, but at the same time, there is a fear of some of these work are also not becoming as transformative as we had envisioned them to be as well. So it really boils down to this, though we have been developing some innovative examples, like promising ones like Sohan's presentation, for example, but there are other examples that are not so helpful at the same time as well. And we have tried to analyze. And what we are also calling, on the next slide, is that here we need to be really centering this as a clear spectrum of the work with boys and men. If we are saying gender justice or gender equality has a benefit for boys and men, we also need to understand that men and boys are gendered beings themselves. And hence anything to do with feminisms and gender equality has to do with boys and men's lives themselves. Particularly in relation to climate, on the first point I said, it is issue of existence, right? And hence we need to recognize boys and men's gendered being, and how gendering of boys and men from an early age has an implication on how they behave. We talk about allyship, but again, allyship has become something which should have been very proactive, but again, become very much thing like, oh, we are doing that for others, and this for myself conversation is not really picking up. So it kinds of then saying we are doing favor for somebody else, and hence not ownership and politicization of how it should look like. If we are not seeing a gender justice or climate justice as equal benefits of men, then we are not only helping others, we are benefiting from the equality to just system as well. And hence we need to understand boys and men as beneficiaries of change as well. If we are then looking at boys and men as beneficiaries, they can't just be passive beneficiaries either. They need to step in, they need to step up and take on appropriate responsibility, but in an accountable way. And then step in with feminist leadership, of course, as agents of change, and the cycle should continue as it is, so that we can really look at changing not only the individual behavior change, but looking at the systemic change and mobilize men in different spaces, different positions as well. That includes individual men at the community level to men who are running the states. So I think that's where we are concluding with this article, is that we need to look at that aspect when it comes to, and doing this work in a very careful and transformative manner is really, really important. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. And as in the chat box, Bilkis said that what an insightful session. I totally agree. What an insightful session. And what we can agree is that 1.5 hours is not enough. That's probably one thing we can agree on. So I'll open up the floor for 10 minutes. And if you have any questions to ask to Sohan and Laxman, and also other speakers as well, please feel free to raise your hand or leave any question. So while we're reading, so yeah, as Laxman told in the last slide, I think this is a very, very interesting one. There are three, like a triangle of the positionality of men, right? And I've heard a lot of discussion in the MenEngage Alliance as well. So, Laxman, what do you think, like, what is the most common pattern of positionality in the current existing men's movement or pro-feminist men's movement that you see? You see so many allies or other form of positionality?
Yeah, no, I think, in majority terms, what we have seen is that differences of understanding of what even are we trying to do or achieve as a result of this work on engaging boys and men, right? And questions about, and that connects with also the climate denial agenda as well, is that boys and men see this as sort of giving up power, while in essence it is not that. Actually, it's more about sharing of power, so power with as a concept, and that concept is still emerging in the field, thereby resulting into a lot of boys and men's involvement in this work is with the sense that, oh, I'm doing this for others, and not seeing why and what value does it bring to for myself. And in the context, as I added in the chat box as well, it's while we understand patriarchal masculinities is also at the roots of climate crisis, but also the climate crisis is also informing or changing the notions about masculinities or what it means to be a man, particularly the traditional and stereotypical ideas of what it means to be a man, which is protector, provider, and so on. And in the current context and changing economic paradigm, that maintenance of the norms is not possible. So how do we really challenge and bring that to the fore is becoming a little more challenging. But I think, yeah, at an allyship level is where a lot of discourses are being upheld. But I think, moving towards more the agents of change is where we are really trying to push, so that there is an ownership, sustainability issue, and across age range as well, as Andy asked, for example. Working with young people is so important as well.
Thank you. And we have another question from Amy. And so the question is, how would you advise educators and curriculum developers to work with designing learning experience when being explicit about gender dynamics can be perceived as a targeting or reinforcing gendered binaries? Should it be avoided, and should we focus on human aspects? Which is I think, very critical question. Laxman or Sohan or other speakers, do you want to answer this question?
Sohan, you want to go?
I can share a little bit about challenges, like Laxman from Nepal, but I'm from Bangladesh and Muslim majority country. So some word is very, challenging, like gender diversity, even transformation. So in Bangladesh, people have a transphobia. So while they are hearing transformation, like our approach is gender transformative environmental stewardship, so sometimes people think it's a gender changing, means the people's sexual identity changing, Then we change it Bengali word, it's Rupantar. Rupantar also same thing like the gender changing. So we face that challenges. Even our audit firm rejected our audit, first audit firm rejected our audit to Ecoman project. So, but we try to how we can contextualize and how we can, fit in the local communities. And while people here is a men project, so men are so happy that first time they are joining any men related program. But while they are seeing that it's not men program, then they are quite unhappy. But by this time, we ensured that it's not a men empowerment program, but it is a program that can support everyone. So our Ecoman program, the women leadership was central, feminist leadership was central. So that's why the allyship is important, but also what the Laxman mentioned about the beneficiary, that's also important. Why I should work for the gender equality if it's not beneficial to me? So in pedagogy or in curriculum, we can communicate that gender equality is not supporting women only, it's also supporting society, societal development, and for me, what benefit for me. So that my observation, and Loxman and other speaker can add. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we can connect to,
Sorry,
oh, sorry.
very
Go ahead.
quickly is that I think when we use the term gender, that's a very important question that we, as MenEngage, are trying not to use it in implying very, very binary identities either. We are talking about gender in spectrum. So all identities and orientations part of it. And sometimes, yeah, we do use neutral terms, but again, we need to be careful when it comes to policy making, is that sometimes gender neutral language implies rigidity and stereotypes as well. And we need to be really careful about neutral language at the same time, but at the community level, we need to unpack what do we mean and try and clarify on it is about everybody, irrespective of gender identities. And to Alexandra, your question is about both the caring of individuals as human or caring of environment. The argument that we are bringing forward is they are not disconnected. They are very, very interconnected. We can't keep caring for humanity or human beings if I am in Sohan context, for example, a Bay of Bengal is completely flooded, and we are continue to destroying the climate. Climate is not going to leave us either. So it has to be connected with, while we care for ourselves, that also implies caring for the humanity and everyone else, including planet as well. So care in that broader sense and understanding and unpacking that becomes really important. Though it's not in one instance, it has to be a bit of a process to unpack that as well, because it's not very straightforward answer. So I'll stop there, and others from the previous sessions might want to join in as well, or anyone else also can respond. It's not that we need to respond to every question as well. So opening that up.
Yes, please, if other speakers want to answer, feel free. And yeah, as Jeff did earlier, I think we can definitely use chat box to kind of answer question as well. Yes, and also Jeff answered the question of Alexandra. And yes, does any other speaker wants to talk about these topics? You can definitely do that. Seems all right. Oh, Jeff.
Well, I've got one thing, which, again, it's quite hard to put the words accurately, is that, and one of the questioners, I've forgotten your name, raised issues about youth and youth education. And I don't think we've directly addressed that, but all the comments obviously do fit into that. But I do think, and it also relates to Michael Kaufman's comment as well, or question. What is needed actually is education for adults, adult men. Because, and it was said by one of the other speakers, I think it was Martin, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of adult men or older men who actually control levers of power. So, it's perhaps hard to envisage, but there's a need for an education of those men who are actually controlling these systems as well. I mean, this might sound a bit utopian, but this is not to neglect youth education, obviously. That goes without saying, but I think that is really important, actually.
Thank you so much. And as we are almost ending our session in 5 minutes, oh my God, can you believe it? So we are going to go to the final session of closing. So I would ask all the speakers, 5 speakers, to come up with one word to describe this webinar. How did you find it? What was the key message? And something like that. And while we ask speakers to answer this question, we'd like to ask you, audience, the 2 questions that will be uploaded soon in the chat box to give us, provide us the feedbacks or any, I don't know, like, how to say it, any opinion for the next webinar session about the backlash. So that's what we're going to do in the next 5 minutes. So I'll pass the mic to Jeff Hearn and Martin and Tamara to describe in one word
And
how
sorry,
was the event.
and sorry, just to say that now Kuram posted the 2 questions in the chat. So if all participants, please reply to these 2 questions in the chat. Takeaways from today's session, and what do you want to know? What would you like in the next webinar coming up in April?
Thank you, Vidar. So Jeff, the floor is yours. Sorry for the impossible task.
Well, I'm not sure if you said, did you say one word? Well, I've got 2 thoughts. I don't know if that is okay.
Okay.
One is what I would call long-term commitment. I think that's one. It's a long-term issue, not a 5 minute or an hour and a half. And the other one, actually, which is a bit contradictory to what Laxman was saying, I'm afraid, is about not human-centeredness, actually. Okay, they're the 2 things. Is that all right? That's more than one word, I know. Sorry.
Yes. Okay, Martin, you want to go?
Careful, as in full of care, but also as in like being aware of the details.
Thank you. Tammy, you want to go?
I think if I had to sum up, I feel actually quite inspired, and it always strikes me how, hearing what people are doing on the ground always, firstly, brought alive the somewhat dry, more theoretical inputs that the first 3 of us did, but also really, brings hope and yeah, one can see that there's a way forward, and I'm looking forward to the next webinar. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I totally agree. I think, yeah, we can kind of like inspire each other in this session through the talk, of course, but through the chat box as well. Everyone provided something very useful and educational. So yeah, thank you so much. And go to Sohan.
I believe in action. It's evidence to eco-friendly transformation. Thank you.
Well, that was very short and clear. Thank you. Lakshman.
So yeah, I think one word that I would prefer looking at this in movement is hopeful. With all of you joining us from all around the world who are interested. So I'm really hopeful that we will continue being together and find ways on finding solutions. There are more questions than answers. So that's why hopeful is the word I will choose. And care obviously is the central, right?
Thank you so much. We have 1 minute, so Kuram, Vidar, do you want to say something?
I would just like to thank you, Sari, for the amazing organizing, facilitation, amazing, really, your energy and the way you took us through all of this in the like amount of time. Fantastic.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Sari, especially. And thank you to all speakers and all participants, and to our two interpreters who've been working hard to translate all of this in.
Thank you so much. And sorry, someone who's raising hand, but we don't have time to answer the question. But please feel free to I don't know, like connect with us. I'm open in the LinkedIn, and I'm sure everyone else have some sort of like contact. So yeah, let's stay connected and bring the hopeful future together.